Welcome to another episode of Tell Me Where I'm Going Wrong with Josh and Sean. Today we discuss how the modern world is being turned into a sea of passive consumers as we lose the ability to critically think while relying on the instant gratification of social media content. We ask if community organizing can help us resist this enshittification of life and foster meaningful change. Enjoy the ride.
Hi, welcome back to another episode of Tell Me Where I'm Going Wrong. And I can't believe we've come so far. We're already at 20, I think this is episode 21. We are just a couple of friends, good friends. We were exes, and we just decided to do a podcast about, can't even say the word podcast, about everything and nothing really. It's just two friends chatting, trying to sort of put the worlds to rights, talking about what their week has been like. My name is Josh, and how are you, Sean?
I'm good. Yeah, so that's my cue to say my name is Sean. It's really good to be here. Yeah, it's about everything and nothing. We're kind of like the Seinfeld of podcasts without the Zionism.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm not sure, or the overt racism from Kramer. I think let's not compare ourselves to Seinfeld in any way at all. Let's steer clear of that comparison.
It was a very funny show, but it's similar in a way to 30 Rock, where you look back on it now and you think, oh yeah, that was kind of a bit strange.
Yeah, problematic. Yeah. I mean, it's hard, isn't it? It's very hard not to go back and look at everything in the past through today's lens. I think that's what we do, and it's okay to do that. I think it's okay to look at today's values and ethics and sort of what the zeitgeist is telling us. And I'm in no way am I excusing previous acts of offensive behavior. But I don't know. There's also I suppose it's a bit of a murky topic, isn't it? It's a bit hard to say absolutely we should avoid all things from the past that have any sort of element of problematic depiction of people or problematic humor, perhaps. I don't know.
But do you find yourself not able to watch certain shows that you did used to watch because of that? I mean, for instance, I think some of the shows that we're talking about, you weren't laughing at the racism or the sexism or the misogyny or whatever. You were laughing at how horrible those people were. So the understanding was the joke, the audience was in on the joke that these people are not good people. You're not meant to like them, but you can laugh. You can laugh at what they're doing because of the absurdity of it and how taboo it was. But are there any programs that are just maybe a step too far for you, or you don't think you realized at the time that they were problematic?
None that come to mind. I'm trying to think of what shows I've revisited recently, and I mean it's funny because it's so confusing because there are shows I think oh yeah, that was from the 80s, and then I remember, oh no, that wasn't from the 80s, it was made 10 years ago, and it was one of these retro shows that was set in the 80s. And I'm thinking of things like Stranger Things or Glow, which I think I was talking about Glow just the other week, wasn't I, on the podcast. These are shows that are made recently, but they're made they're set in previous decades, but with obviously through the lens of today's values and ethics. And so,
don't you think that sometimes when they do make shows like, I don't know, say take Stranger Things for instance, it's always a lot more diverse a range of characters than there would have been in a show that was really made in the 80s.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I mean. It's a false. It plays a trick on your mind, doesn't it? It gives you a false idea of what representation was like in that period, when in fact it was nothing like that.
But is that a positive thing? Is it like a positive way to rewrite the balance? I mean, obviously no one's going to make a show with no black characters in 2024. I mean, that would just be absurd and so ridiculous and so wrong.
Mm.
But how do you think it works in any way to help redress that? I mean, it certainly gives representation to people now who can see themselves in media, but it doesn't make up for the
But
mistakes of
is
the
it just
past.
done to appease white straight people? Is it just done to appease like the ruling sort of people, or the people that generally make these shows? Is it just done
I
to
think,
appease their guilt or their unease?
well, I think it's different when you have a show like Pose, so it's the head showrunner or the person who was in charge of it is a like white cis man, yeah. But I think a lot of the people that made up the team, the creative team, were queer, trans people of color. And so they were involved in what I believe in the writing room, in the styling, in the cast, so the
Mm.
whole ensemble. And so that makes a difference. Whereas, yeah, there are some shows where it does feel very tokenistic.
Mm.
But, even with Pose, the problem is that it still took a white cis man who has the most clout out of sort of queer Hollywood to get it greenlit and to get it
Yeah,
made.
yeah,
But it's preferable that he uses his privilege to do that and then bring as many diverse voices onto the project than it not
yeah,
happen. I mean, that's my view
yeah.
anyway.
It's better that that show exists. It's better that that representation is there, and it was made by a mainstream studio for a mainstream audience.
I
Um,
saw a little clip from Pose on social media this morning, and it was a scene where they were having Candy's casket viewing, and her parents come in, and it's the first time they've seen her for years,
mm,
and so they last time they saw her, they recognized her as a male, and then she's there as Candy in the coffin. But then, in Pose, often people who had passed would come and speak to
mm,
people to have some
mm,
sort of resolution, like the characters would be imagining they were talking to someone.
yeah,
And it was so upsetting. It was such,
yeah,
I mean, I cried so much in that show.
yeah. But it does, it makes for good TV. It makes for compelling TV, and it's a way of processing emotion for a lot of us. But is it not wrong in some way? I'm trying to think of the right word, but is it problematic to recast history in a more positive way? Often not every character in Pose has that resolution with their family, but often they get this resolution. Sometimes, when the character dies, perhaps, but there's often this acceptance from their parents or family or something like that, which I would imagine probably didn't happen an awful lot. Is it just is it not, what's the word, not whitewashing, but is it ignoring the facts? Is it ignoring history? And I mean, not to make it all about Pose, I've been watching Glow, and I don't know how much people know about Glow. It was, a women's wrestling, gorgeous ladies of wrestling. It was a women's wrestling thing from the 80s. It was a real thing. And then this show on Netflix is a reimagining of it. And it's, there are queer storylines, and everyone is very sort of accepting of two women who are in a relationship in the show. And I think, well, obviously I wasn't there as a woman wrestler in the 80s, but I think, what would they have been so accepting in the 80s? Would they have been so open-minded? And I struggle to imagine that they would have been. And so, as good as it is for sort of making TV, is it maybe a bit problematic that these shows are just sort of rewriting a bit of history? Or, all right, not rewriting history, but they're creating incorrect portrayals of a period in time. I don't
Yeah,
know.
but I suppose, I mean, we're talking about Pose, which I suppose this whole conversation sort of stems out of.
Mm,
It was kind of like, to me, it was like a reclaiming of the narrative by the diverse voices to show what could have happened if these people had more of the power.
yeah,
So, they didn't shy away from things like, anti-trans violence or HIV and AIDS, but
yeah, yeah,
there was a higher percentage of happier endings than there might have been in real life in the 80s and 90s for queer people from that part of the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, definitely, especially with, Electra coming into a lot of money and then giving everyone, Angel and Pappy the dream wedding and, all of that stuff going down, it was very fairy tale, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But then, I think they did that because the other side of it, like Pray Tell passing away, and the huge amount of characters that died throughout the show, and spoiler alerts galore here, but with Candy being murdered as trans sex worker, it really was a way, I think, just to soften the blow a bit. Because with It's a Sin, the UK show by Russell T Davies about young people, young queer people living through the HIV and AIDS crisis, that was less sugar coated. That was
True.
pretty much like, hey, here's how horrible it was. Some people had no resolution. Some people's parents still didn't want to know. You remember one of the characters didn't get to say goodbye to somebody because they were lied to, and it was very grueling. I mean, I found that hard going to watch.
Yeah.
Whereas Pose towards the end felt a little bit more like Cinderella-ish, in that it
Yeah.
was just a little bit, you kind of left thinking, okay, well, these people, even though they've suffered loss and we've lost some beloved characters, it's going to be mostly okay. Whereas at the end of It's a Sin, I was just like, oh, the whole world is doomed.
Yeah. 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 True. And not to generalize, but American media, mainstream media does tend to have much more of a sort of, positive spin. Us Brits are quite sort of cynical, quite a cynical, miserable bunch, in inverted commas. I think we don't go for the schmaltz as much as American audiences or American creators do. But I'm completely blanking on his name. That the writer of Pose, or the director or producer of Pose, I should say.
The creator.
Yeah. What's his name? I'm completely blanking.
What's his name?
But
He did Glee, right?
he did Glee, and he did, Hollywood. He often does these very unrealistic, fantastical reimaginings of periods of history.
Did he just do that Menendez Brothers?
Yes, yeah. I can't remember. I can't.
But didn't we just say his name at the top of this
I
podcast?
don't think we've said his name, and no, and it's really annoying me because I know that the name is in my brain somewhere. But as any regular viewers or listeners will know, my recall is not what it should be. Um, oh, it's really annoying me. It's on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, let's talk about something else because it's just gonna
Well,
annoy me
talking
that.
about shows that were really of their time and maybe feel a little not problematic, but and not even old-fashioned, but something is sometimes of such a place and time. And for me, I've been watching a few sort of rerun clips and outtakes from The Royal Family, which
Oh,
is a
right.
sitcom set in Greater Manchester. And I mean, what was that? The early 2000s? Did
I
that come
think so.
out?
Yeah, yeah. I'd say two noughties.
And it was about like a working class family in Manchester or Greater Manchester that it it wasn't making fun of poor people or working class people, but it was a real
Well, it
nod and understanding to like a view from the inside of that world.
I'd say, yeah, not making fun is not, yeah, you're right, it's not the right term, but there's a lot of self-deprecation in British humour where it's like we look at our situation, and whatever that is, whether it's a comment on class or race or social structures or office environments, we look at ourselves and we are sort of critical, but in a humorous way, like we take a critical look at ourselves, and it's very sort of self-deprecating. And I think that that show does that really well. It's not at all sort of making fun of class differences, but it is finding the humor in situations that are to some extent dictated by class.
It's
Um,
really that sort of mix of tragedy and comedy. But
yeah.
I was watching it and it made me think about some of the things we're talking about with Seinfeld. I mean, Seinfeld is much more explicit in their explicit in their kind of framing of racism as a joke.
Mm.
So they talked about anti-Semitism, or Kramer did that ridiculous thing with the tobacco store Indian Native American carving, where he was
Don't
doing
remember
like a
that.
Native American war cry out the back of a taxi with it. And
Okay.
people said in the show they recognized how like inappropriate that was, and the comedy was that it was outrageous and that he was an idiot for doing it.
Mm.
But with the royal family, it was
But
much more.
but sorry before we jump to the royal family, but it's like, okay, so you can point it out in the show that it's problematic, but you're still using it as a comedic device, and that's probably where a lot of the problems are in Seinfeld. That sure, they wouldn't have thought of themselves as being racist, and it's similar, I suppose, with 30 Rock as well. Like a lot of the time, they were poking fun or painting racism in a bad light, but they were still sort of using a lot of racist tropes to in order to prop up that comedy. So it's a fine line, and I think both of those shows
Yeah,
really
but
overstepped
don't
it
you
a
think
lot.
with 30 Rock, they kind of. I'm not making excuses for it. If anyone has a legitimate critique of, the style of comedy, that's fine, or like the political nuance or lack of, I'm all for it. But I mean, Liz was painted as a stereotypical cat sort of lady spinster type person who
Hmm.
only like was happy when she had a sandwich, and then Pete was like, balding, sexless, kind of unhappy in his marriage most of the time. Tracy Jordan was stereotypical, uh, hip hop aligned black celebrity. Uh, Jenna was an airhead, self obsessed with staying young, and Jack, Alec Baldwin's character was like, stereotype. It was all just traded on the lowest common denominator stereotypes,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's, I feel like, is different than something like Friends, which is truly offensive, which was just there was no diversity. Anytime there was, it was the butt of a joke. It wasn't a comment on, say, homophobia, but there would be like a joke that, I don't know, Ross and another character accidentally touched hands, or someone thought they were gay, and they had to spend the whole episode proving that they weren't. But whereas with 30 Rock, it wasn't, they had queer characters, or they had like cross-dressing characters, and they had all sorts of things that, I don't know. I find there's a very clear distinction between the comedy of something like Seinfeld and 30 Rock, and then the offensiveness of something like Friends,
Yeah.
which was just horrible. But going to the Royal Family, if anyone hasn't seen it, it's not Royal, it's Royle. So even the name of it is kind of comment on the class divide in the UK. So these people, their last name was Royal, Royle, but it's obviously a play on the term royal family, like the Queen at the time, who's dead now. The Windsors, the royal family. And I was watching it, and there are some things, like it's very easy to get emotionally attached or feel supportive of the characters in the royal family. They're quite lovable, aren't they?
They are, yeah, yeah.
Even though they're maybe like they're fat shaming somebody, or they're, I don't know, one of them's done something illegal, or I don't know. There's there's a certain, I suppose, because I grew up in working class or poor families, that you learn to take all of that with a pinch of salt after a while. And to me, the royal family is almost like a mockumentary of what
Hmm.
it's like to grow up like a poor or working class person. But there was one clip this morning that I watched, and in hindsight, I didn't know how to process it. And it was the son in the family, Anthony. He has his friend Darren come over, and then they go off to the pub together. And the father, Jim, makes a joke about them being gay, and the Dave, played by Craig Cash, him and Jim, the character, they laugh together, and it's kind of like I don't know who's the woman. Do you know any of the actors' names? Like the person who plays Barbara, the mother of the family,
Oh,
Sue something, is it?
I can't remember her name.
Sue.
Yeah.
But she kind of says, "Hey, don't be like that. I don't." And she gets it kind of muddled, but she says, "I don't care if he's straight, gay, or a homosexual. This is the millennium, Jim. We're not like that."
Right.
And so there's kind of like a little bit of a trying to resolve it, but he still sat there and made a joke about them being, I don't know, excuse the term to anyone who's sensitive, but I think he used the term arse bandits. And so I was like, well, I really like that character Jim, and he's kind of a nice person, even though he's not. But it's complicated, right? And it's like you're not meant to like them all the time, and they're meant to
Mm,
do things
mm,
that a working class person would do in that time period in Manchester. There would
yeah.
have been those attitudes, right?
Mm. It's
I
so
don't know.
tough. It's such, like I said, it's a fine line, and comedy is always, I suppose, pushing that envelope slightly ahead of the curve, and that's what makes good comedy. I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about it. It's the the characters sort of you know semi-homophobic jibes are not painted to be admirable.
No,
Um,
that's the
and
difference there.
so
That's the
it's
difference. Do you remember? You're probably, I don't know if it was a big thing for you, but do you remember the UK comedy show On the Buses?
not really no.
And it was set in a bus garage or a bus depot, and it was so horrendously sexist. It was like early sort of the era of Benny Hill and stuff, right? And I saw a clip of it the other day, and it was just straight up jokes about sexual like misconduct, but laughing about it, and that was the
Mm,
joke. And then it was
yeah.
cheeky and winky and stuff. So it's the royal family is very different from that because if they're making a joke of something like that, it's because they're recognizing that it's wrong or someone's been in prison. I don't know. It's different, right? Like it's not the punchline.
Mm.
The
Yeah,
punchline
yeah.
isn't someone's
There is a
gay
difference.
or sexually
But
assaulted
all
or
right.
whatever.
So what do you think? Okay, there was a show. I guess this was the noughties as well, and it was a British comedy show called Little Britain. Matt Lucas and David Walliams, and they really talk about pushing the envelope. I mean, they really did push it too far, I think, and even they have said, or at least Matt Lucas, I don't know about David Walliams, but I know that Matt Lucas himself has said there are a lot of things that he definitely wouldn't do today that they did back then because they thought at the time that it was acceptable. And I mean, apart from some skits where they're in blackface, where they are wearing fat suits, there are also there are
They
also
they they also dressed up as like not transgender, but they dressed up as like characters who are cross dressers or transvestites.
Yeah, yeah, and they made sort of ridiculous caricature like representations a lot of these things, and they used those qualities as part of the humor. And I wasn't going to discuss those ones in particular, but there was one skit or repeating sort of scene that came up a lot, and it was where it was like a very white English rural village fete, and
Mm-hmm.
somebody had made cupcakes or something. Doesn't really matter what it was, and the other women were sort of saying, "Oh, these are delicious, these are lovely," and then the person who'd made them said, "Oh yes, I used an Ainsley Harriott recipe, who is a black British cookery show personality." And so, the people who had just been praising the product, as soon as they found out that the recipe was by a person of color, they would then start throwing up. And it was ridiculous,
Yeah,
but it's I suppose they would have argued at the time, it's making fun of the horrible racism that
yeah,
exists in society,
yeah. Because that
particularly,
whole show was about Britain being small-minded,
yeah,
and
yeah,
so, but yeah, they did. I think that was quite a. I wouldn't say clever, but it was a very thought-provoking skit. So you weren't laughing. You were in that they got it right with that one, in my opinion. That you
Yeah,
were
that's
laughing at the racist people. You
yeah,
weren't laughing at the racism,
exactly. That's what I'm
right?
saying. Like, but then it's
Yeah.
they then sort of I think became maybe a bit emboldened by that and went a bit too far with the other things. But talking of emboldened, there was something else I wanted to talk about this week. So we can go back to royal family and Little Britain if you want. But I did see this week a headline that the Macquarie Dictionary had made the 2024 word of the year, and it's enshittification. So E N
Are you
S.
sure that's a true headline? You were being
No, no, no.
like,
It's true. It's they have said the word of the year according to Macquarie Dictionary is enshittification. So Enshittification, enshittification, and the definition is the gradual deterioration of a service or product brought about by a reduction in the quality of service provided, especially of an online platform, and as a consequence of profit seeking. And I just thought, in light of what we've been talking about on the podcast in recent weeks, particularly about loan scum, and if you don't know what we're talking about, you'll have to go back and listen to a previous episode. Basically, it's an anagram. The person, the man who has bought what was formerly known as Twitter, and it just made because what you've said a couple of times about the kind of content that Twitter, or I'm not going to call it by its current name, what Twitter serves. I had to log in the other day. I'm still trying to deactivate my account. It's a long story. But I logged in, and I mean, if it's not tweets from Lone Scum, it's like you said, it's really awful. Like
mhm,
video, like
yep,
CCTV footage or mobile phone footage of people like fighting, like punching each other, like
yeah,
really hurting
and
each other. And I'm like,
yeah.
what on
That
earth is this being served to me
there's
for?
even video content that gets served to me all the time of people being killed by things, by accidents,
How?
or and
How
it's
is,
just there online. And
yeah.
also, it's there is so much faked content online.
Mm.
Like it's almost become a worthless endeavor to try and consume media online because if you see these fake videos of somebody saying, "Hey, watch this," and then they'll pretend to prank somebody, but the person who's getting pranked is obviously in on it. What value is there in watching that?
Well, it's enshittification, like it's a consequence of profit seeking, and I just yeah, I love that word. It just sums up so much of what we've been talking about, and I don't think this was in the obviously in the definition, but what we were talking about last week, I've been thinking about it a lot. I had, as you know, I've had a 36-hour period with no Wi-Fi at home this week,
Was it the enshittification of your wireless provider?
exactly. But it did provide me with a lot of time to, read books and just have deep philosophical thoughts about the world. And
Yeah.
one of the things that we talked about in last week's episode has been playing on my mind a little bit. And, I was sort of talking about how not that I long for the days of religion underpinning society, but I do wonder what we are working towards on a societal level now that religion has become less important to us. What is the central driving motivation for us to make the world a better place? And I have been thinking a lot about it. And when I saw, when I saw that enshittification thing, I thought, well, this really it ties in with that in my mind. It's this, and it's I know that I sound like grumpy old git when I say this, but I do. I look around and I think there are so many things about modern life which do seem to be getting worse. And it,
That sounds
yes,
so old.
I know, I sound like an old person. I am an old person. I'm nearly 50.
No, but it's not even, doesn't sound like an old person. It sounds like somebody who's getting left behind as things change.
Right.
It was like that. the concept of like being a technophobe or something, of, well, it was better in my time. But you think, well,
But no, I'm
technology,
not.
for all its failings, technology actually has given us a lot, and it does a lot for us. I think what's happening is the the loss of critical thinking. Like, if we had technology and social media and, I don't know, everything else that's coming along, like streaming platforms, everything, but we've still really put the importance on training people to be critical thinkers, the world would be very different. We would be able to use all of this technology for the empowerment of humankind. And instead, it's being used as a self-serving tool of instant gratification. And
And profit.
yeah, yeah.
It's been
But from a
take
user, like an end point of the user, it's about what it can do for you right now, so you don't have to think deeply about anything. And then there's not even 1% of people who are making a fortune from it, from the eradication of critical thinking. People are making a
from
fortune from
the
that.
enshittification of society.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's I'm not advocating for us to go back to previous periods in history at all, and that's the whole MAGA movement is one very extreme, I suppose, example of that mentality, and I don't advocate that for a second, but I suppose I have been thinking a lot this past week about what it is that we could do either as individuals or as communities to counter that narrative of capitalist, ego-driven, self-serving, that dynamic that is
Well,
seems to
I
be.
think you're seeing like a really stark example of what people can do when pushed too far, and that's what's happening with Twitter. That's now called the letter between W and Y, but we don't want to say it. I don't know why we can't say the letter,
We can
but
say the letter, I suppose, but
yeah. So
just.
X is people. It's a mass exodus from that platform. People are
Hmm.
just like, I'm not going to partake in this anymore. This
Yeah,
is not for
but
me.
and I suppose the other thought that comes to mind then is, okay, fine. Well, hopefully, that individual lone scum will somehow lose some power. But there are so many other. It's much bigger than him, and it's much bigger than one platform. It's like a pandemic, really. It's worldwide, and it seems to be, from my mind, from my nearly 50-year-old mind, it seems to be getting worse. And I do worry about what we can do. And all right, you and I will not live for that much longer, not to be
With any
not
luck.
to be morbid, but well, I'm nearly 50, you're 50 already, so we don't have that much longer left. But I do worry about what the future of the planet looks like for other generations,
How,
and I'm talking as two people who have no children of their own. So it's
I've got a few stuffed toys that I sleep with. I'm worried about their future. But
I'm worried I'm worried
what,
about their present.
how much, uh, how much of the enshittification of the planet do you think you're going to live to see? What's the state of the planet
Well,
going to be like in
it's
20
all
years?
it's already worse than it's frustrating that we have this technology, we have the means, we have the skills, the tools available to us to do so many wonderful things, and yet we're using those tools to promote false idolhood, and we're using those tools to share videos of people being hurt or killed. I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's it's so messed up. It just
I
leaves
think
me.
that my way to resist this, and it has been for a while now, is to do things that I think are worthwhile, that build social capital, and that resist oppression. So
Hmm.
that's what one of the reasons I work for a charity. Like, as you all know, I work for Made in Hackney. Link in the show notes if you want to find out what we do. But it's a job. It pays me money, and so it's still in a weird way part of a capitalist system. Like, I have to pay bills with that money, but it helps people. and it does it with causing as little harm as possible because everything we do is vegan. And also, you know, with you, I run the Queer Open Mic. I've run like social events for well over a decade. And sometimes these things make me money, sometimes they don't. But I try not to do anything that doesn't have some element of good attached to it. And that's all I can do because I've still got to survive. I've still got to pay my rent, and I've still got to pay my medical bills and buy medicine and put the heating on in winter. But I try not to be attached to things that have zero good in them. Right? I think that's what we can do. If everyone could try and do that, instead of like, you know, there are people that will go and get a job for £120,000 a year, and it doesn't do anything from anybody. It just enriches them. There's no point in that. Like, that's not helping fight oppression. It's not helping reverse the ill effects of capitalism. And so, to me, that's what we should be doing. We should be trying, even to me, in a weird way, this podcast is a little act of defiance or a little act of like fighting back. You know, we get to share our thoughts and we get to be empathetic about things. We get to discuss deep topics and then sometimes stupid things, and we get to have a laugh. We maybe get to keep somebody company for a little while. You know, if somebody's watching, hi Helen. You know, so if any, you know, it's like, do you remember when COVID happened and I was in lockdown on my own in Mexico City, and I did those little live streams every day for 100 days in a row to give shout outs to businesses or charities or to keep people company, to keep myself company. You know, there should be stuff like that happening all the time. Everyone should be doing things that generate positivity and resist oppression. But, you know, we're being trained to be passive consumers, not active participants.
Yeah, and that's what worries me. And obviously, I'm still coming to terms with the results of the US election, and it's very easy, and we've spoken about it on the podcast before. It's very easy to sort of demonize or ridicule the people that are voting for autocratic, you know, narcissistic leaders. But you know, where do we go from here? Like, we can't just write off, you know, between 40 and 50% of the population. It's like with Brexit. We can't just write off 50% of people and say, well, there are 50% good people and 50% bad people. You know, that's really oversimplifying things. But what can we do? Like, I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying about, you know, the things we can do and that we should do and we are doing. But is that enough to counter the other narratives?
We need to not. The first thing that we can do is not trade in hyperbole. So, like, we need to just speak truthfully about things. So, for instance, it's not 50% of people in the US voted for narcissistic dump. It's 50% of the people who voted. So we know it's not. So we get it in our minds. Half of the US want that, but no, like less than, I don't even know what the percentage is, but it's probably less than a third or less than a quarter of people who are actually of voting age want that. So, and then the same with Brexit.
I was going to say it's like Brexit. It was I think there was a 60% turnout, of which it was split halfway. So only 30% of people voted for Brexit and 30% voted against it. So
and then a lot of people, and that's people of voting age. So, you know, you've also got people who were whatever the voting age is in the UK, they were under that at the time, who have now since then become adults who don't want it. And so, yeah, it feels really crummy that there are millions of people that either voted for narcissistic dump or Brexit. But how good is that name, narcissistic dump? That should be like a drag name or a roller derby name.
Yeah, I was going to say a punk band, narcissistic dump.
Yeah, that's good. So we need to also not let our own emotions about things and legitimate emotions uh, take us down that sort of hyperbole sort of thing. Like, it's not as bad. It's not like 99% of all adults voted for that person, or even 50% of all adults. They didn't. And so there are still a lot of good people, and also a lot of people who are just really disengaged or disenfranchised, or don't, or have been actively, um, what do you call it, like suppressed from voting, right? There are people who have been systematically or systemically suppressed from wanting to take or being able to take their vote. So we need to do stuff like that. So we need to fight. I'm sorry, you might be able to hear my washing machine in the background.
I could hear
I
a
don't
little
know.
something. I wasn't sure what it was.
I don't know. It'll be over soon. So if anyone can hear that on the podcast, apologies. But you're getting, this is the real world. It's like, get used to it. It's not all sugar coated around these parts. Tell me where I'm going wrong. So yeah, we need to keep being community organizers and helping empower people to have a voice,
Mhm.
and run community events, create opportunities to build social capital, help people become part of the system, support independent business, stand up and challenge people when you see people either in the workplace or in community being sexist or racist or homophobic or transphobic. Just and then lead by example. We need to do. That's how I feel. Like everything I do, instead of just complaining that no one's doing anything, I just feel like, well, at least I'm doing what I can, and if that encourages somebody to do something good as well, well, that's great. I mean, sometimes in life you shoot an arrow and it goes real high. Hooray for you!
I was just going to quote Dorian Corey. Um,
Love Dorian Corey.
all right. Well, yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, I still do love the enshittification word. I think it's such a. I mean, it's very, the Macquarie Dictionary gave it a definition that relates just to sort of online content, but I think I feel like it's a society-wide phenomenon.
Oh yeah, for sure. And
It was exacerbated by this week. I had 2 mornings in a row trying to get to work, and the traffic was just there was complete enshittification of the traffic. And I know and this is the problem. Like in London, the traffic is getting worse. The infrastructure was not designed and has not been invested in enough to cope with the volume of vehicles on the
hmm
road.
yeah,
And it's so frustrating to me that right-wing pundits take over the narrative of being, wanting to spend money on infrastructure for cars.
yeah,
And it's there are so I get into conversations sometimes with people. I'll complain about something to do with traffic in London, and then they'll come out with like some racist or vaguely thinly veiled racism about the mayor Sadiq Khan, who's from a Pakistani background. And it really frustrates me that the discussions or discourse, I suppose, around things like that get so easily consumed by hate speech and just right wing horrible politics.
but I
Um,
think there's a direct correlation between those sorts of voices or opinions rising to the surface and the decline of critical thinking. Because ever since like the 70s or 80s, and there was this sort of um, anti-intellectual movement in
mm,
politics,
mm,
and then that it became uncool or anti like anti everyday person to be a critical thinker. And then I mean that's reached a crescendo with you know narcissistic dump, that it's like even
and
to read a even to
in,
read a what's that.
I was going to say that even to take things back to this side of the Atlantic, looking at the prime ministership, is that the right word, of I don't want to say his name either, Joris Bonson. Um, that's the worst anagram. We need to come up with a better one than that. But
Bojo.
anyway,
Bojo.
yeah, Bojo. But that that's to take things back to this side of the Atlantic, yeah, like we elect clowns. We just elect clowns to be our leaders because you're right. Like there's been a intellectualization of mainstream politics, I suppose.
And I don't mean that from a really sort of uh, like I read Wuthering Heights kind of, or I went to university. Critical thinking doesn't have to be about book smarts or going to college.
And also,
It's
critical thinking isn't tied only to left wing politics. I mean, there can be
no,
critical thinking on all ends of the political spectrum, but that's not
yeah,
what modern politics
but
is.
it's tied in perfectly to what you're talking about, the enshittification of like social media with the corrosion of critical thinking on a wider scale. Because if you see the media that people who are 40, like maybe even 50, like our age and under, consume daily and up to 8, 9, 10 hours a day, it
Hmm.
is not designed to promote critical thinking or intellectualism. It is
Hmm.
designed to give you instant gratification, and it makes you less capable of thinking creatively. Like it
Hmm.
just does. Like I don't
Hmm.
know if anyone wants to argue with me and say, well, that's extreme or like hysterical way of looking at it, but it is not. You're not sitting down or reading a book. You're not watching. You're not even watching like University Challenge and learning something, or you know what I mean. It's not even like things. Things online can be enriching. Like it's
Hmm.
not technology isn't the problem.
Hmm.
It's the type of content we're being served and we're being trained to respond to,
Hmm.
and it is making people not think. And then that way we don't have the brain capacity to think our way out of catastrophes, and we don't have the collective will of the people to stand up against tyrants because we're just like our brains are just so soft.
I'm trying really, really hard. I'm really trying to resist the urge to go into a rant about reality TV and how much this ties into what you're saying. But I think probably our listeners are sick of me going on about reality TV.
But I kind of think reality TV is the precursor to what we're talking about,
Mm.
because that doesn't even really exist anymore. Most people consume reality TV just through 30-second Instagram or TikTok bites. Like that's
Right.
people
Yeah.
don't watch the actual real original content anymore.
And
So
also
people,
reality TV, I think it's not even reality anymore. Maybe it was when it first started. Maybe the first couple of years of reality TV were genuine sort of sociological experiments or insights into society. But now, of course, it's so tied up with the promotion of self and the manipulation of representation to promote, whatever individuals want to promote about themselves or production companies want to promote TV stations. It's all about getting viewers and either winning a prize or coming out with the funniest one-liners or stuff like that. It's not
but
really.
because yeah, but
It's
because
what's the experiment about the. Oh, I should really research this, but as our watchers and viewers know, we don't do any research for this show. But what's that thing about the experiment, the sort of the philosophical experiment about whether the subject is watched, whether if they know they're being watched, it affects the outcome of the experiment. It affects their behavior when they know they're being watched. I'll do my research for next week's episode, and I'll tell you exactly what it is I'm talking about. Um,
one of the main problems with reality TV or media now is there is so much of it. It's so broad
hmm,
that there is no sort of way that society can keep track or um, have any sort of agreed social contract that people adhere to. It's just a free for all. So
hmm,
when there were maybe only 4 TV stations when we were younger, generally there were unwritten rules about what was acceptable, and they weren't always good rules. Sometimes, like there could have been more queer people on TV, whatever. But, now it is a free-for-all, and there is no way to control what happens, what people consume. And because there is so much to consume, we consume too much information. And so it only sits on a surface level of our brain. There's not much going in and being processed and deconstructed and then reconstructed. It's all just we're just seeing it at the front of our brains, and then it's going away again. And those pathways and neurons that are used for critical thinking and that deconstruction and reconstruction of information and that creating opinions,
and also time. It's also we don't really have time to sit and reflect. So we jump from consumption of one medium to another medium, and that might be skipping from reading news online to watching a TV show online to messaging with friends online. It's just they're all different mediums, but we jump from one to the next. There's very little time to sit and reflect and think about.
It's very hard to find time to just sit with something or let something sit with you. So the other day I listened to a podcast, and it was the one that you recommended to me. It was David Duchovny interviewing Amy Mann.
Oh, yeah.
And after I listened to it, I didn't find David Duchovny a very good interviewer.
No,
I found
he talks a lot about himself. He's a bit like Louis Theroux, like that. Louis Theroux, everyone says, oh, he's such a great documentary maker, and I find him also a bit sort of narcissistic. He likes to talk about himself when he should be interviewing the subject.
But I found, Amy Mann is a very interesting person to me. I've been a big fan of hers for a long time, and she's somebody that predates this kind of instant gratification of art. You sometimes have to wait a couple of years for an album for her, or like up to 7 years, and we would travel to see her, and it was like there was effort in the reward. And so hearing her point of view on mental health, pop culture, it's very interesting to me. And so after listening to that, I was annoyed by David Duchovny, like actually annoyed. Like it was painful to listen to him. But some of the things that Amy Mann talked about, I didn't want to forget them. I wanted to sit with them, so I didn't listen to anything for the next hour as I was walking around, just so I could ruminate, just so I could think and process and then rethink and then see, does it apply to my life? I wonder what it was like for her. Oh, I remember that time I saw her. Just giving myself the privilege of just talking and thinking to myself in my head about what I just experienced. Otherwise, it would have been, okay, well, I'll listen to Kathy Burke podcast now, and I would never have thought about what Amy said.
Because we just move so swiftly from one thing to another. And it's the same, we when we were growing up, we would not have access, we would not have unfettered, limitless access to music. We would own, some vinyl, some cassettes. We would maybe get to buy a new one a couple of times a month, perhaps, or maybe a friend would lend us something, or we would go to a library, perhaps, and take out an album on loan. But
or if you were me, you would go to the local charity shop and shoplift record,
stealing from charities. But
I critically thought about it while I did it, so it's all right.
Yeah, sure. I now we jump from track to track, from artist to artist, from decade to decade, and in some ways that's just wonderful. It's so great to be able to do all of that, but then it's completely affected our appreciation of art. It's our appreciation of things like music, like interviews with people and stuff like that. There's too much information out there for our human brains to really value it.
I thought of this the other day. I saw a clip of Trixie Mattel on stage with Cyndi Lauper. Did you see that?
No.
So Cyndi Lauper is on a current tour in North America and has been bringing a special guest on stage every night to sing Girls Just Want to Have Fun.
Okay.
And one night she brought on Trixie Mattel. If you don't know, Trixie Mattel is a character name for a drag performer who is also a business person, owns their own makeup line, is a big YouTuber and podcaster, and originated on RuPaul's Drag Race. In the public consciousness, obviously they were a performer before that.
They were a real
And,
person before RuPaul's Drag
yeah,
Race.
and so they were on stage singing "Girls Just Want to Have Fun" with Cyndi Lauper, and I watched like a 30-second Instagram story of it, and then obviously the algorithm knows that I like Cyndi and knows I like Trixie Mattel, so I saw it a couple of times across the day, just that 30-second clip, maybe from a different angle in the auditorium. When I was young, I would have heard rumors that had happened. Like months later, I might have been able to see something on TV, and then 10 years later, somebody might have shared something when YouTube finally came out. Now I look at it and I go, oh yeah, that's amazing. That person, Trixie Mattel, is on stage with one of my childhood heroes and they're singing this iconic song. And then straight like that, I switched to something else and I stopped thinking about it. And I think that would have been so monumental if I was a young person who was a fan of either of those artists, that would have blown my socks off and I would have just been talking about it for days. I would have even sent money to someone overseas to get a VHS recording of it if someone recorded it on TV. And now it's like it devalues it so much having it just be there. And I love Trixie Mattel. I love Cyndi Lauper. And that is just like, oh yeah, that's old news now. After 1 millisecond after I've watched a 30-second clip, it's old news.
It's like our currency now is instant gratification. And we're always in deficit, we're always in debt. And we're always chasing that next thing. And yeah, it's I don't know where we're heading. I don't know where it's leading us. Is it, sorry to go back to what I was saying before, is it Schrödinger? Is that what I'm thinking of about the observer being observed affects their behavior? Is that Schrödinger?
No,
I'm not sure.
That's Schrödinger's cat, where if there's a cat in a box, the cat is both alive and dead.
Oh yeah, no, okay. Well, I'll have to go.
Both possibilities are true.
Yes, that's right. Unless when the box is closed, you don't know if the cat is alive or dead. Yeah, all right. So no, it's not Schrödinger then. Sorry.
Yeah. It's Cyndi Lauper's. It's the Cyndi Lauper effect. And so to me, it's like a little bit sad that I felt that way, because this is a once in a lifetime thing for both of those artists. I mean, obviously, probably more impressive for Trixie Mattel to be singing with Cyndi Lauper than it is the other way around. And this is like this monumental thing that will never happen again in either of these artists' lives. Cyndi is kind of like in the twilight of her career after being famous for over 40 years and being a huge star. Trixie Mattel is like, one of my favorite sort of more modern entertainers. And then this thing is just reduced to like this little snippet of instant, like consumable content on a phone screen that's gone in 30 seconds. And then that's it.
It's interesting. And it's something that you and I, people of our generation, we didn't grow up with that idea, but it was sort of popularized as we were coming of age. I think a lot about, in discussions around social media, I always think about Madonna and her film Truth or Dare, or it was called In Bed with Madonna in the UK and some other markets. But
in Australia,
I think about that a lot, just because it was, in a way, it was a form of social media before social media existed. It was a medium that she used to give an insight, but a very curated insight into her world in a way that she couldn't at that time, because there weren't any other social media that existed at her disposal at the time. So she just created her own one in a way. And
it was also a way for her to control her narrative.
Yeah.
And to take control of a narrative that, obviously with her immense fame had spiraled beyond her control through tabloids and music fans thinking certain things about her. It was a way to show herself as hardworking, a little bit bitchy, fearless, a great dancer. That it was maybe a
Cultured,
little,
inspired by art, inspired by queer
yeah,
culture,
like well
inspired,
connected,
hmm
well connected, famous friends. It was
Yeah.
a little contrived in that it showed her being very loving and caring to the dancers, when in reality, a lot of them said actually she didn't give a shit about us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so it was, yeah, it was like a precursor to reality TV and social media, and that it was a platform in which she curated her public persona through.
mm mm.
But yeah, it just doesn't really exist. Like the people also don't want to sit through an hour and 20 minute documentary or a film anymore to learn
Do they
something.
want to sit through an hour and 10 minute podcast?
Like I haven't even looked. My brain has been so deshitified that I don't even want to go and look for
Enshittified.
the deshitified. Yeah, it hasn't been deshitified; it's enshittified. But it's been so enshittified that I have just spoken about how much I love Trixie Mattel and Cyndi Lauper. I have not gone to look anywhere online for that full 3 minute 40 second performance, which would exist somewhere online.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
my brain was so trained into thinking that 30 seconds I've seen of one of the most beloved songs and two of my favorite performances, that's enough for me. Move on to
hmm
the next thing.
Because there's too
That's
much.
how.
There's too much in the minute that it's taken for you to say that. There have been countless other pieces of content created which you feel that you need to see those as well, and it's just
Talking of content that's been created, can I congratulate you on your song "Empty Seat," which is the theme song for this podcast, has reached over the lofty heights of 3,000 streams on Spotify.
woo. I can retire from my other from my day job.
I think you only need another 1 million, no, 3 million streams or something to make about £20,000.
I'd say it's a lot more streams than that, but yeah.
No, I think you could. I think if you get to about 3 million streams, it's
I
a
don't
it's
know.
a couple of
We'll
it's a
have to
couple
do
of.
the maths off air. But anyway,
Anyway,
it's not.
how does it feel that that's not massive? Like it's not like you know like die with a smile numbers, but it's like 3,000 times your song has been streamed on a platform. How does that feel?
It's a good feeling mostly. It's odd. I feel quite sort of detached from the I suppose the representation of myself because I don't really brand myself. I don't do a lot of social media content where it's sort of me talking to the camera or anything like that. And so it does feel weird that the song, and it's a very personal song, and I've spoken about what the song was written about on the podcast before, and it's good. I'm pleased that it's getting out there and it's being heard by people in the world, but it also feels a little strange to me. And that's just 3,000 views. I can't imagine what it's like for artists when they write a very personal song and then it, goes platinum or something like that, and it's getting played on radio stations all around the world. What that must be like. But it's nice, and I'm pleased because you know, if I just wanted to make music for myself, I would sit in my bedroom and I would never record anything. And the fact that I, went to the time and sort of financial expense of recording these songs and that they're getting heard by people around the world, that's great. And it's funny because I was saying to you the other day that I look at the stats on the Spotify for Artists app about
Yeah.
where my songs are getting streamed, and it seems like Finland is the top listener of my music. So hello to all my Finnish listeners. It's odd, it's just odd. I
If
wouldn't
there's
have
anyone in Finland who has listened to the theme song of this "Empty Seat" by Josh and the
3,000
Jumpstart,
times.
let us know what it's how it speaks to your Finnishness. How does it speak to your reality? Why is it more people in Finland listening to it than
Yeah,
somewhere else? It could just be a pure accident.
yeah,
There could be some glitch. Who knows what it is? But
yeah. Who knows? But yeah, it's funny to me that people outside of my immediate sort of familial and social circles would be consuming something that I've created. But
yeah,
it's lovely. It's lovely. Thank you. Let's
well,
let's
that's
wait
great.
till I'm at 30,000 and then
Okay, well, I think the next goal is to try and get it to 10,000. I think 3,000. It's you just need to triple that and a little bit more, and you're at 10,000, and then you can start thinking that from there you probably got to get to like 100,000. So
Yeah,
you've got to
it's
just
baby
keep chipping
steps.
away at it.
My other song, Over Again, that's up on Spotify, has finally cracked the 1,000 mark, so that's good. But I'll be talking. The rest of my EP is going to be released in early January, so I'll talk about that in future
Where's
episodes.
your main audience for Over Again? Are they in Finland as
I
well?
think it's Finland as well. Oddly enough, yeah, it's. I have no idea why. I don't know.
Maybe you'll be touring. I said to you the other day, you're like these bands that, they really chip away at stuff, and then they, for some bizarre reason, no one can put their finger on. They get really famous in one particular market,
Mm.
like how the boy band 911 is now really big again in
Was it in
uh, um,
Malaysia?
my God, my brain is not working. It's the enshittification of my brain. I
I
can't
know.
even think. I
The
just watched a
struggle is real.
documentary about it the other day.
Oh, really?
Is it Vietnam?
I don't know. Oh, yeah,
Oh
no,
my
it is. Yeah, you're right. It's Vietnam. Yeah, yeah.
God. So
Yeah. Well,
it's
big
like
in Finland.
like they're still known here, but they go and play like arenas and concert halls, and so it might be that you end up just every year having to go and do like a little mini concert
Well,
tour in
okay.
Finland.
Well, I think Brazil was the second one. I think it was Finland and then Brazil. So quite sort of, disparate parts of the world. So maybe on my 2025 world tour will have to just be Finland and Brazil, which I'd be
Your
fine with.
world your world tour is going to cost you a fortune in different outfits for the different climates
I
that you'll
know,
have to go
I
to.
know. What will I do?
You need to get booked on like a cruise ship as a cruise ship entertainer. That would
I
be
would
that would be
totally do
fun.
that. Didn't Rosie O'Donnell do that as like she did like the queer not like booked to perform, but didn't she run
Oh,
queer
she had a
cruises?
cruise. Yeah, Rosie's cruise. I remember I made that joke one day when we were talking to Amy Mann. She, we were talking to her outside the stage door in the snow. Where was it? Was it outside Philadelphia or?
Yeah, I
And
remember
we were
now.
talking to her, and I said, "Oh, you've got to come back to London, come to England." She said, "Oh, I'm scared of flying. I won't do it." Um, and she said, "Oh, maybe I could take a boat." And she laughed in her deadpan kind of way that she does. And I said, "Oh yeah, go on Rosie's gay family cruise." And it was like one of the only times I've actually heard her laugh in public.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
she,
my one of my life achievements is
but
to make
she
Amy
did end up
Manson.
doing a cruise. I don't think it was a gay Rosie O'Donnell cruise, but she did end up doing a cruise. Um, I wish I could remember the details. She talked about it on her podcast, which I don't think she makes anymore. But
The one she did with Ted Leo.
yeah, the process of art, the art of process. I mean, the art of
Mm.
process. Um, yeah, yeah.
No.
Shall we wrap up? I think our
Yes.
conversation's gone from here, there, to everywhere this week. Don't forget, if you're listening or watching, you can subscribe, whether you're consuming this media on Spotify or on YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast and leave us a comment to let us know where you are in the world, what you thought, how enshittification is affecting your life. And if anybody wants to find out more about me, they can find me at joshandthejumpstarts.com or on Instagram at joshandthejumpstarts. What
And
about
they
you,
can
Sean?
find me on Instagram at fatgayvegan. Apologies if your brain has been trained to only consume bite-sized bits of information and you've had to sit through an hour of us talking incessantly. You've done very well, and this is where we're actually here to help you, like sort of grow your. This is like those brain training things you can get for your phone. Like if you can sit and listen to us for an hour, it's actually going to make you smarter.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes. I was gonna we'll talk about this in next week's episode, perhaps about how I listen to everything sped up now, and watch some things sped up as well. But I'm not sure that's doing much for my brain, clearly.
No, that's problematic as well.
Yeah. All right, folks. Thank you for joining us, and we will be back in your feeds this time next week. Until then, resist the enshittification of life, and we'll see you very soon.
Okay, bye to Finland.
Bye.